Ahoj, ahoj a vítaj pri podcaste Chcem sa učiť. Ja som Andrea, lektorka anglického jazyka a ako vždy prevediem ťa aj týmto podcastom. Dnes si budeme čítať nový príbeh, ktorý sa volá The Whispering Gallery. Prečítame si prvé 2 kapitoly, takže sa môžeš tešiť na ďalšie kapitoly v budúcom podcaste. Ak nechceš len počúvať, ale chceš si čítať spolu so mnou, určite si otvor náš blog www.chcemsaučiť.sk/blog, kde si to môžeš spoločne so mnou čítať. Poďme teda na to. Now, if you will just come this way. The voice was smooth and silky. It suggested that wonders existed, which would make all you had seen so far become thin and flat and forgotten. Amazing things lay just around the corner, and the voice knew the way. But Frederick was just 5 years old, and therefore he knew what voices really said, and it wasn't always what the words seemed to mean. This voice said really, "I hate you all, especially the boy, and this is the way out, and I shall be glad to see the last of you." The voice did not intend, after all, to lead the way up the secret stairs to the golden ball. The guide was a tall, thin man, with a yellow hollowed face, an eye hole so deep and shadowed you could not be sure whether they were eyes in them or not. Not unless you looked hard into them, and so far Frederick had not found the courage to do that. Now and then he glanced up at the guide's face, but each time he was frightened away by the sight of the strangely small nose and the almost lipless mouth with the big white teeth that seemed to be fixed in a bitter grin. Yesterday was the magic morning when Jim was driving him around London in the open-top car. Just him and Jim. They were stopped in busy traffic in Fleet Street. "Look," said Frederick, pointing over the front of the car. "That must be the biggest building in the world." The driver looked up at the cathedral. "It looks big from here because it's standing on the top of a hill, Ludgate Hill," he said. "But it's not as big as the Empire State Building in New York, and you've been up that." Frederick tipped his head back as far as it could go. The great dome was like an enormous bubble, and on the top stood a high tower with a golden gallery around the bottom. And at the top of the tower was a golden ball with a golden cross on it. All the golden things shone in the sunlight, but the ball shone brightest of all. "Don't be stupid, Jim," said Frederick. "It's much higher than the Empire State Building. It's the biggest thing I've ever seen. And look at that lovely golden ball. I wish I had it to play with. I wonder if it comes off?" "Would you like me to climb up there and fetch it for you?" asked Jim with a smile. "Would you?" said Frederick eagerly. "Would you?" Jim laughed. There was a time when he would have sighed and murmured under his breath, "These rich people are all alike. Get me this, get me that, they say. Look, the moon shines pretty, get me that." But he had been driving for them for a long time now, and he knew that they were always wanting something. Not only to have something, but to go somewhere, see something new, have someone praise them, do things for them. They were always hoping to discover something that shone bright and new to fascinate them. Like the golden ball on the top of St. Paul's Cathedral on a sunny day when you were 5 years old. "Jim, you're not listening. Get me the ball, Jim." "It's much, much bigger than you think, Freddie. When you're small, you don't realize the size things are. 6 grown-up men could get inside that ball." "It's no bigger than an apple," said Frederick. "Perhaps it is an apple, a golden apple. I've always wanted a golden apple. I wonder if it is, Jim. Do you think it is?" Jim Bates opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had often done that in the service of the Staggs. Mrs. Stagg frequently found the truth unpleasant. Her son also believed only what he wanted to believe. "I don't know, Freddie. We must go back to the hotel now," said Jim, quickly but firmly. "Your mother said that you were to be back at 1 o'clock for lunch." "Ah," said Frederick, disappointed. The car turned left at Ludgate Circus, then went through the side street to Holborn and back to the hotel at Marble Arch. Frederick kept looking back, but he could not see St. Paul's again, because of the shops and office buildings. He couldn't understand how such little buildings could hide it. Chapter 2. "But I can, Frederick, not this afternoon," said Mrs. Stagg. "We're having tea with Lady Carnford." "Can we go tomorrow then, Mom?" "No, we're going home tomorrow." The corners of Frederick's mouth turned down. There were tears in his eyes. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Stagg, anxious to prevent her son's noisy screams. "Well, look, I could just spare half an hour, no more." Frederick smiled. "Thanks, Mom." Half an hour was a long time, easily long enough to reach the Golden Apple. It was a long time, but Skeleton Face, as Frederick silently named the guide, wasted it. When he had taken the little group around the cathedral, Frederick hoped that now they would go up to the Golden Ball. But the quiet, cold voice said, "Now, if you will just come this way." And it led them down the stairs into the underground rooms, where some of England's most famous people were buried. This cold, shadowy place seemed like the natural home of the voice. It seemed to Frederick that the voice wanted none of them to leave. It wanted them to stay here. It would just talk smoothly and quietly until it sent them to sleep, and then, somehow, it would get them to lie stiff and dead, with the others under the hard stone floor. "I want to go upstairs," said Frederick. That was when the voice began to hate him. "Now, if you will just come this way." They went upstairs, past a notice saying, "The Golden Gallery and Ball," and up some more stairs, up and up and up. As they climbed behind the guide, Frederick became excited. Maybe this guide wouldn't give him the ball, which of course was really an apple, but if Mom saw how much he wanted it, she would buy it for him. It didn't matter how much it cost. Mom was the richest lady in the world. She could buy him the whole cathedral if she wanted to, but he only wanted the apple. The richest lady in the world was breathing heavily as she climbed. "Oh dear, I didn't know it was going to take as long as this," she said. They got to the top of the stairs and Frederick followed the guide through the only doorway there. "Oh," they all said when they found they were standing on a narrow ledge which went right around the inside of the great dome. Only an iron rail stood between them and the ground, far, far below, where tiny people the size of insects moved around. Frederick looked up and saw that, although he was very high up, the Golden Apple was at least as high again above him. There must be more stairs somewhere that lead up through the dome, perhaps some secret stairs. He hesitated and tried to go back, but the heavy grown-ups around him pushed him forward. And then they stopped because the guide had stopped. Skeleton Face said, "This is the famous Whispering Gallery. If you would please move around to the opposite side and stand listening against the wall." "I don't want," began Frederick, but Mrs. Stagg grabbed his hand and said in a low, annoyed whisper, "Oh, come on." The group moved slowly round, with the fearful drop on its right-hand side. Some glanced down, but others dared not look. All were silent. Frederick wanted to run, but the cathedral was a place where you neither ran nor shouted. At last, they reached the side of the gallery opposite the doorway where the guide had remained standing, made tiny by distance. They arranged themselves in a line, kneeling with one knee on the seat, putting one ear close to the wall. Frederick did not put his ear very close. He did not wish to hear that voice again. But he did hear it, loud and clear, as if the guide were standing beside him, yet he could see him a long way away with all width of the dome between them. I am speaking only in a whisper, yet you hear me clearly. The pictures you see on the inside of the dome were painted by Sir James Thornhill. They show the events in the life of St. Paul. Frederick put his mouth close to the wall. "We don't want to stay here," he said. "We want to go up to the Golden Apple." "Frederick!" said his mother, shocked and alarmed. Her voice sounded amazingly loud under the great hollow dome. The guide's voice had stopped. There was a moment's awful silence, during which Mrs. Stagg's face became redder and redder. Then, "Now, if you will just come this way." The voice was smooth and silky. It suggested that wonders existed which would make all you had seen so far become thin and flat and forgotten. But Frederick was 5 years old, and therefore he knew that the voice really said, "I hate you all, especially the boy, and this is the way out, and I shall be glad to see the last of you." The voice did not intend, after all, to lead the way up the stairs to the golden ball. The group moved round the great half circle back to the door to a skeleton face. Frederick would not look up. He knew that deep in those dark eye holes, hatred burned like a flame, and if the other people hadn't been there, he was glad now that he was in the middle of a group of grown-ups who could protect him. Staying close, he watched his feet and his mother's feet descending the stairs, and soon they were crossing the black and white floor, then the dirty black steps outside the cathedral. He saw the car and Jim's smiling face, and the fear inside him slowly disappeared. "Get in, Frederick, don't just stand there," said his mother, pushing him. "Go as fast as you dare, Bates. We're 10 minutes late now. What will Lady Cornford think of us?" Frederick's behavior was not at its best at Lady Cornford's. He was silent and, when forced to speak, rude, very rude. When they got back to the hotel, Mrs. Stagg punished him by sending him straight to bed. But he did not feel any guilt, only an aching regret that tomorrow they would be leaving London and leaving the Golden Apple behind. Someone else would come along and take the Golden Apple away while he was on the silly ship back at the silly school in Boston. He got out of bed and went to the window. He watched the buses moving in and out of Park Lane and the people in Hyde Park. It was summer and there was still an hour or two before it got dark. Suddenly it seemed as if someone else had taken control of his body and was making him do things he hadn't yet decided to do. He found himself putting on his clothes and opening the door quietly. Then he was at the open window at the back of the building, climbing through it and descending the iron steps of the fireplace. It was a straight road back to St. Paul's, but it was a very long road and his feet were tired as he climbed the dirty steps in the pale, rose-colored light coming up the hill from the sinking sun. He entered through the big doors and heard the sound of singing. At the other end of the building, he saw the 2 lines of singers and the people watching them. No one noticed him move quickly between the chairs and up the stairs which led to the Whispering Gallery. All the guides should have left, including Skeleton Face. All he had to do was find a place to hide for a little while until everyone went home. Up the stairs he had noticed a corner where he could hide. He hoped he could reach it soon because his legs were aching and he was very tired. A tu na dnes skončíme. V tomto príbehu budeme pokračovať v nasledujúcich podcastoch, takže určite sleduj náš web, naše sociálne siete, aby si sa dozvedel o pokračovaní. Ak sa chceš začať učiť angličtinu, 27. februára otvárame nové skupinové kurzy, takže ak stále váhaš, choď sa pozrieť na náš web, zisti, aké kurzy otvárame a ak tam niečo sedí práve pre teba, prihlás sa naň a začni sa učiť. Zatiaľ vám prajem krásny zvyšok dňa a počujeme sa na budúce. Bye bye!